Saturday was a big day for IU football, a scrimmage, as well as Big Ten Network being in town. What did we learn about the Hoosiers, their quarterback battle, and where do things stand now less than 3 weeks away from their season opener?
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. You are Locked On Hoosiers, the only daily IU podcast. We're part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Big thank you to you guys for making us your first listen, tuning in wherever that may be from today. I'm your host, as always, Jacob. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Saturday, as we said, just a big day all around for IU football. They have the scrimmage, the kind of annual scrimmage, which, as we've kind of learned in the past, goes a long way in determining where things stand, how things move forward in fall camp for the Hoosiers. At the same time, Big Ten Network was in town. They drop around from every fall camp at every Big Ten university. Saturday just so happened to be the day that the Hoosiers were showcased, which meant we got a fair amount of insight on what Indiana looks like. It's been a couple weeks of fall camp. There's still a couple more weeks, 19 days until Indiana opens against Ohio State, but we've learned a number of things. And as we continue to do, the focus is on the quarterback battle. Where do things stand? Did anybody get a leg up? The answer appears to be no, basically. It's still a pretty tight battle. Dan Revson, kind of the voice of Big Ten Network, was tweeting out some thoughts, some takeaways, as much as he could share. He watched the scrimmage. Him and the analyst with Big Ten Network did watch a scrimmage. Obviously, they're not going to share everything, but here is the tweet he had about the quarterback battle. Tough to separate out the quarterbacks today. Tayven, Jackson, and Sorsby both had okay days, the kind of ups and downs you'd expect from inexperienced guys. Gets interesting with Dexter Williams ahead of schedule in rehab. Tom Allen absolutely expects to have him back at some point. We talked a lot last week, spent a couple segments on Dexter Williams and whether he should be brought into the fold when he's healthy. So it's interesting to hear yet again that he's expecting to come back. And right now, I would think that he's probably going to certainly factor into that quarterback, I don't want to say battle, but he's going to get snaps as things stand right now. Outside of that, it sounded like the guys kind of had up and down days. The analysts kind of talked in generalities when talking about the quarterbacks, but one of the quotes was, quote, "It's hard to come out of practice today thinking either one has an edge." It sounded like some up and down, as they said. A little bit of good, a little bit of bad. Some plays that they would like to have back, some plays that they impressed. They still did the 50-50 split thing. It certainly doesn't sound like that's going to change moving forward. Tom Allen kind of talked about both quarterbacks. Again, a lot of this was just speaking in generalities. We know how secretive Tom Allen likes to be, and we know in fall camp during a quarterback battle, he's probably not going to tip his hand too much. So about Sorsby, the thing that sticks out to me is arm talent. He's a guy that can make all the throws, ability to extend plays with his legs. Talked about other things. That was just kind of the key soundbite there. Talked about the need for him to continue getting snaps and building that chemistry. He said that for both Sorsby and for Tayven. So he repeated a lot of stuff for both of them. About Tayven, he brings a moxie to that group. He has a lot of confidence. It certainly is what you would expect. That kind of checks out what we've seen for Tayven. With Sorsby, we discussed when he was recruited. We talked to our recruiting expert, and I may go back and find that footage, maybe play some of that from that episode about a year, I guess maybe a little bit more than that now at this point. When we talked to him, he liked Sorsby a lot. He said he could make some incredible throws, and it sounds like that's the type of quarterback Sorsby remains. So it's going to be interesting to see what separates one from the other in the long run, because right now we're 19 days away. It doesn't seem like there's any separation. Now, I don't think they're going to go into the week of, kind of the preparation week for Ohio State, not knowing who the quarterback is. So I think realistically we're something closer to 12 days away from a decision needed to be made. I think you need to head into the week of the Ohio State game knowing who your quarterback is going to be and having him prepare as QB1. We're not going to know that until the first snap of the Ohio State game, maybe a little bit beforehand when guys are taking snaps with the ones. But I think the team will probably know that a little bit sooner. But Saturday offered no clarity on the situation. It's still two guys battling it out. The good news is we seem to have gotten a lot more clarity on things in other positions, but the quarterback battle remains a complete mystery. For better or for worse, it's great drama, but it doesn't sound like it's a competition where two guys are just performing at the peak level. Granted, they're redshirt freshmen. I don't know that I would expect that anyway, but it's an interesting battle right now, especially as you factor in Dexter Williams, who sounds like he's going to be back 3, 4, 5 weeks into the season. Is that all the leash these young guys are going to get before you bring Dexter Williams back and have him start? There's a lot of moving pieces here. But right now, this quarterback battle is 50-50 as things stand. Sorsby, credit to him. I admittedly was not someone that really gave him much of a chance. That was on me. I just assumed if Tayven Jackson's transferring in, he had an idea that he was going to be the starter. That very clearly has not played out in that regard. That was an assumption I made. That's what it was last season. That doesn't appear to be what it is this season. I'm sure Tayven has been aware of that, even if I haven't been. But whoever wins this is going to have earned it through fall camp. How much of a chance they're really going to get with Dexter Williams' return looming, that'll be kind of the next storyline to watch. Let's look at the offense. IU doesn't have a lot of production coming back, even if they have a lot of players coming back. We'll talk about who stood out, who got some mentions, who was singled out by a number of people during the Big Ten Network broadcast. We'll do all that here in a moment. Let's talk about today's sponsor, LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is simple. You head on over to LinkedIn Jobs. You create your job listing. You add that and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. They have simple tools like screening questions. That's going to make it easy for you guys to find the right candidates with the right skills and experience, expedite the process so that you can interview the right people and ideally hire the right people. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. As always, guys, appreciate the support. We had a banner week last week. It was a lot of football talk. We're getting into a football mode as the season revs up, but we still have plenty of basketball we're going to talk about this week as well. Some women's basketball recruiting news, maybe some men's basketball recruiting news as well. We'll get that to you on Recruiting Wednesday. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure everydayers, you guys are subscribed, and whether on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, whatever it is. Let's look at the offense. Big Ten Network shared an interesting stat. Not a good kind of interesting. 46% returning production statistically from last year is what IU football has this season. It's not a lot. And I was just kind of thinking who even were the top returning players offensively. You're looking at Jalen Lucas, some, Josh Henderson, a good amount, but those guys don't even account for barely 1,000 yards of offense. Dexter Williams, technically, even though he's not going to start the season. And then you're into the Donovan McCauley's. It gets real. There's a big drop off. Cam Camper as well, obviously, as he comes back from injury, but there's not a lot. IU lost a fair amount of its offense from last season. If you look at just yards from scrimmage, number 1, Sean Shivers. Number 4, Emery Simmons. Number 7, number 8. That's 4 of the top 10 that left. Dexter Williams is a 5th who isn't going to be available to start the season. So half of the top 10 in yards from scrimmage aren't on the team this year. A lot of production they have to replace. Let's start at the front. The offensive line, it's gotten a ton of discussion. I'll say there wasn't anything substantive said about the offensive line. All the vibes seem really good, though. The quote from Dave Revson was that Bob Bostad, quote, has made an immediate impact. It certainly sounded like they were better on Saturday than they were at really any point last season. They were discussing the offense and the scrimmage. The Big Ten Network crew was. I believe it was Jerry DiNardo that said, I thought about the run game. He said, I thought that was a real positive today. I thought they ran hard. They were real decisive. When's the last time we thought we considered the run game a positive in any game of note? You might have had an Idaho or an Indiana State, whatever it was, but it sure would be nice if the offensive line was much improved this year. Again, if nothing else, it feels like good vibes that this Hoosier offense has. There were some receivers that were singled out, which we'll talk about in a minute. But for as much as is up in the air about the quarterback position, everything around it feels much more optimistic. I don't come away from this scrimmage feeling great about the quarterback battle. I come away from this scrimmage in the comments feeling really good about the rest of the offense, which is not really what I expected at any point in fall camp. But the offensive line, just the possibility of them being passable is just great news. That has me giddy with excitement. But Walt Bell was interviewed. There were some guys that he singled out at different positions, but one of them was Turner, who we talked about in that backfield last week when we were discussing just how talented the running back room is. Christian Turner is a guy that's certainly going to factor into that. They kind of have a 3-headed monster of sorts with Lucas, Turner, and Henderson. So it's going to be really interesting to see if this offensive line is improved, because if they are, it changes a lot of the dynamic about this offense. You can get away with some subpar quarterback play and inexperienced quarterback play if the offensive line is good. That's a big jump from where they were, and this is all based on kind of vibes and some general quotes from camp. But when's the last time we even had good vibes about the offensive line? I'm optimistic. Wide receivers, there's a number of guys who have been singled out over the last week. Cameron Perry was a name that was mentioned that we haven't talked much about. A redshirt freshman that his route running was complimented. Dave Revson mentioned a number of guys. He mentioned Donovan McCauley is kind of a known commodity, which I guess his name is a known commodity. He hasn't really done much as a wide receiver, but he mentioned he mentioned McCauley and then mentioned two other names that stood out to him, and it's names that we've heard a lot. DeQuece Carter from Fordham, E.J. Williams from Clemson, two transfers. He said, quote, both flashed today. So DeQuece Carter was someone, the Big Ten Network interviewed Jalen Lucas. He also singled him out. Quote, been making big plays all fall camp. A very interesting name. Someone that put up a lot of stats at Fordham. Statistically, he was incredible. It's a huge jump from Fordham to Indiana, but he certainly is catching eyes and is impressing in fall camp. Last season at Fordham, he had 1,166 yards, 13 touchdowns. If he can make that jump, that's another huge weapon for Indiana, and it adds pressure to guys, but it means Indiana doesn't have to rely on Cam Camper as much. For example, this season, when Cam Camper went down, IU had nobody really step up. It would be nice to have other guys to alleviate some of that pressure. E.J. Williams, another guy, Walt Bell said, quote, he's long, he's explosive, he's a great practice player. Talked about how hard he worked in practice and with his blocking, with just his running the routes and just that general kind of approach to practice. There have been some articles written about him, some encouraging ones, and that he was someone that was really highly rated out of high school, played as a freshman at Clemson, and then an injury his sophomore year knocked him down the pecking order, and he just could never find his footing again. And he had to go elsewhere to try to break in back into kind of the depth chart, high up the depth chart. I think he's someone that's certainly going to get a lot of snaps and certainly someone that's impressing. If I want to look at a glass half empty approach to this, no mention of Donovan McCauley is a little concerning. Revson saying he's kind of a known commodity. Maybe that's a compliment or something, but I was certainly hoping to read big things about what he's doing. There was one tight end mentioned. That's a position we haven't talked at all about. AJ Barner transfer leaving means that there's a huge gap there. Bradley Archer is someone that Walt Bell talked about as a guy that stepped up. He's a transfer from Stanford. There are a number of tight ends on this roster, a lot of tight ends on this roster. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 tight ends on this roster feels excessive, but somebody's got to step up, and there's a lot of snaps to be had. Archer's kind of the first name we've heard mentioned in that regard. The defense is entirely new. So many questions, some positives coming out on the defensive side as well. We'll take a look at who stood out, who was singled out, and why things look different as they were described on that defensive side of the ball. We'll do that here in a moment. So one of the things that caught my eye, I guess caught my ear more when watching the Big Ten Network piece, is how they said the defense, quote, looks different on all three levels. The Big Ten Network's analysts, DiNardo, Revson, those guys, Howard, they didn't really explain that, but I do think that IU's defense needed to look different on all three levels. The defensive line, we've talked a lot about, has had a complete overhaul. That's a group that should look a lot different. They haven't been, I mean, to be frank, they haven't been good for a number of years. That's a group that needs to look different. The linebacking crew, probably the most stability in that group, but even then, they're having to replace someone in Cam Jones, an edge rusher, and Deshaun McCullough. Both those guys need to be replaced. So there are holes to be fixed there as well. And then you have a secondary where it's really hard to have any idea what's going on there. So let's start on the defensive line. Andre Carter got lots of people's attention. Jalen Lucas, quote, he's one of the best defensive linemen I've ever seen in my life. Jalen Lucas hasn't played football in the Big Ten for a long time, but he's played some good defensive ends in his time in football. That is certainly an interesting comment. At the same time, Dave Revson kind of spoke highly about him when discussing him as someone that kind of jumped off the tape or jumped off the, it's not even tape, just jumped out to him while watching these scrimmages. I don't think I can state this enough. I think Andre Carter is going to have an absolutely huge year. Everything we hear time and time and time again is how good he looks, how impressive he looks, how much he kind of is wowing people and being an impressive player. I really think we're in store for a big season from him, which I'm happy for. Please. I would love to have when's the last time IU had a really good defensive lineman? They had one in Ryder Anderson a couple years ago, but he kind of tailed off towards the end of the season. Before that, when's the last time IU really had a good defensive line? It has been a really long time. It's just not something that the Hoosiers have found success with. I mean, I can think back to the 2010s, 2009, 2010, when they had some good defensive linemen then, but it's just a position the Hoosiers have struggled with. And so it would be nice to have guys like Jamie Curlew and Greg Middleton and guys like that. I was looking back to try to remember the names. It'd be nice to have guys like that again. Hopefully, Andre Carter can be that. Linebacking group. Lynelle Carr, another name we have not mentioned. Tom Allen, I guess, gave a quote that said he might end up being the best pass rusher that they've had. Again, a name that we haven't talked much about. He's a transfer who flown under the radar a little bit, and he's from West Virginia. He's a 6'1", 240-pound senior. And these are the ones that you kind of need to hit on the diamonds in the rough, or whatever phrase you kind of want to use. But Carr is someone that played in just 16 games at Virginia, had 26 total tackles, 1 sack. Hopefully he is someone that's able to really make an impact, because that's an area the Hoosiers need someone to step up as well. Again, when's the last time they had a really good pass rusher? Micah McFadden was that, but it was out of such a unique spot. You typically don't, your best pass rusher typically isn't a middle linebacker, but an edge rusher might be a better way of kind of qualifying that. When's the last time they had a really good edge rusher? They might have that in both Andre Carter and Lynelle Carr this season. So some optimism there. There wasn't a lot mentioned about the secondary. A lot of questions kind of remain. Nick Toomer was the only one that really kind of got a shout out for being a sure-handed tackler. We're going to see. I have a lot of questions, concerns about this secondary. There's just so many things we don't know. JoJo Johnson is another guy who has been discussed kind of over the last week. He was late getting to IU because he was finishing classes this summer at Iowa Western Community College, a redshirt sophomore. Noah Pierre's kind of the known commodity there. outside of that, you have a lot of questions. Maybe it's a JoJo Johnson. Maybe it's a James Mons III, who was a decently high-rated recruit coming into IU. Tyrick McDaniel was a really high-rated JUCO player. Josh Sanguinetti got a lot of snaps last season because of injury. There are guys, Kobe Minor, redshirt junior, transfer from Texas Tech. There are guys that potentially could stand out, but there is been little to nothing discussed about them. And it's just such a wide open battle right now that we'll see. That's the group I have the most questions about defensively, but again, a lot of good vibes coming out of this. The one other thing of note, I guess the special teams looked rough in the scrimmage. It is worth mentioning that IU, their kicker was not available for this game. So last season, Charles Campbell was the team's kicker. He transferred to Tennessee, left a hole for the Hoosiers to fill. Now, they got one of the very best, the top kicking recruits. And so I would imagine Nicolas Radicic from Texas is going to start. He just, quote, is nursing something right now was the phrase. He didn't play on Saturday. You're still asking a lot of a true freshman to step into that role, but we'll see how that plays out because it doesn't sound like there's a lot of competition behind him, but just keep an eye on that. It sounds like he's going to be the starter. Sure hope he is because it doesn't sound like things are great behind him right now, but something worth noting is that the Hoosiers do have to replace their kicker, and they seem to be relying on a true freshman in that position. Ugh. Hope they nailed that recruitment. Thanks again, guys, for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every single day. We'll continue to discuss fall camp, maybe some more takeaways from Saturday scrimmage if more comes out, but we're going to talk some more basketball this week. I want to look at some lineups that are most interesting, could be the most dangerous for the Hoosiers, particularly on the men's side. We might do it for the women as well. We have some recruiting news on the women's side for sure for Wednesday. So be sure you guys are subscribed wherever you are listening or watching us from. Follow us on Twitter at LO_Hoosiers. Leave that quick rating and review. Helps us out immensely. As always, though, guys, I hope your Monday starts off great. Most importantly, LEO.